Okay, hello, my friends. It is Sunday, February 9th, 2025, and these are five big stories. It's coming out a little bit earlier today. It is Super Bowl Sunday in the United States, so people will be watching the Super Bowl rather than me. So I figure if I can get this out earlier, maybe you can still watch. Okay, Russian oil just can't catch a break. Now selling at $16 discount to Brent, under $60 a barrel, and with transport costs doubling in the past 3 weeks due to sanctions, and again, those are Biden era sanctions. Russia is now earning only around $27 per barrel above their $19 production cost. Okay, so here's what we know. It cost them about $20 to produce, and then they have to ship it somewhere. And then so the $27 a barrel is about what they're able to reclaim per barrel. Now, this is important because they sell, it's a huge volume. And who they sell to China, they sell to India. Well, what happens if India stops getting it from Russia? Bad things start happening in India, right? So let's look at this. New U.S. sanctions on Russian oil tankers, and this was from a couple of weeks ago. New U.S. sanctions on Russian oil tankers and energy companies threaten India's access to cheap crude oil. India's dependence on Russian oil has grown significantly since 2022, Ukraine invasion. And the new sanctions could lead to higher inflation and supply disruptions. Russia is expecting to attempt to circumvent the sanctions through its shadow fleet of tankers and by offering further discounts on its crude oil. The U.S. has introduced stricter sanctions on Russian energy companies and tanker operations starting in March, which could make it more difficult for India to continue importing cheap Russian crude. In January, U.S. Treasury launched new sanctions on 2 Russian oil and gas companies, in addition to 183 tankers. This move could drive up the inflation in the South Asian state, that's India, as it's forced to buy more expensive energy. So it's tied together here. So look what happens. A 2019 assessment from the Reserve Bank of India suggested that for each $10 per barrel price increase in oil, that could lead to a 0.4% rise in headline inflation. That's overall inflation. So if oil goes up by $25, inflation goes up by a percentage point. That's really, really bad for the economy. India imported around 88% of its oil needs, and between April and November 2024, with around 40% coming from Russia. A reported 75 of the 183 sanctioned tankers have delivered Russian crude to India. So while Modi is talking about how he's all about peace, and he wants to see peace between Russia and Ukraine, what he really wants more than anything else is for inflation not to spike in India. And so he's not going to get in the way of that because he wants this cheap oil. Now, I understand if you're the Indian prime minister, you should actually care about the economy in India, but that might be somewhat of a conflict of interest when we're talking about what's going on in Ukraine. Okay. Next big story. Russia is adding 100,000 troops and establishing new army divisions. New arms factories are being built. Collaboration with North Korea is intensifying. Putin has no intention to negotiate. We must flood Ukraine with weapons and bankrupt Russia with devastating sanctions now, says Zelensky. Okay, I think that all of that is fair. Russia's not planning on going anywhere. This is the ISW. Russia expands military forces, signaling no interest in peace talks with Ukraine. Russia's military expansion continues with new divisions, deeper ties with North Korea, expanding defense production, suggesting no interest in peace. And the Russians are targeting Central Asian migrants for military recruitment in Ukraine. So Ukraine's National Resistance Center said that Russian forces are coercing draft-age men into contracts through threats of arrest and property confiscation. So they're getting them wherever they can get them, but they are getting them, and they continue to get them, and they plan on getting another 100,000. Now, why are they doing this? Well, Zelensky answers the question himself. Remember, we were talking about the rare earth minerals and that sort of thing? Well, here's what Zelensky's saying, and this is the English translation, so we'll hear the translation.
These deposits are priceless. It is huge amounts of money. Huge. That is why we need to protect it. So if we are talking about a deal, that's what the Americans want, then let's do a deal. We are only for it. Let's do the deal. This is what I told President Trump when we were together. I told him this is the victory plan. Why victory? Victory for all. We will protect those trillions. We will prevent Russia from mining the minerals which will later be used to produce technologies for the three countries of the axis of evil. The Americans helped the most, and therefore the Americans should earn the most. And in rebuilding Ukraine, they should have this priority, and they will. I would also like to talk about this with President Trump.
Okay, so we got to deprive the Russians and by default North Koreans, Iranians, and perhaps even Chinese from getting this material. The only way you deprive them of that is to run them off the land. And so that's a really clever way of tying Ukraine's interest to the United States' interest to keep supply of weapons and that sort of thing. So I think this was intentional when Zelensky put this plan out that way. Okay. Meanwhile, North Korea built a drone with Russia's help. Mass production starts this year. Growing alliance between Moscow and Pyongyang is taking shape as North Korea, with Russian support, moves to mass produce a newly developed drone. And here's a little bit more about, well, let's first talk about the workers. North Korea is sending thousands of workers to Russia in 2024. 13,000 North Korean entries into 2024 into Russia. Claiming educational purposes despite UN prohibitions on overseas labor. But that doesn't matter at all. Like, look up the documentary North Korea's Secret Slaves, Dollar Heroes, and just watch how North Korea uses essentially slave labor to further their ends. And like, if they don't do it, then basically their families back home suffer, so they do it. Okay, Russia and North Korea have reached an agreement under which Pyongyang will receive this technical assistance to develop these drones. And here's another example of this, or what the drones might look like. I'm just beside myself with Kim's white outfit here. I've never seen anything like that, but okay, whatever. North Korea will produce and develop drones jointly with Russia in exchange for sending North Korean troops to the war against Ukraine. So again, this is Kim's business model. He's earning lots of money by supporting Russia, and it doesn't matter if he's just, sent 10,000 men to their death. He doesn't care about that. He's figured out a business model that he's never been able to figure out before. And so sending more factory laborers, that's helping his business model too. If they're made in North Korea, that's helping his business model as well. Meanwhile, Ukraine is surpassing Russia in FPV drone production among 1,300 new models of weapons and military equipment developed and codified since the start of the invasion. About 250 of those were new UAV models approved for use in the defense forces. Now, the really interesting thing about this is how they're being done. It's not top down from the Ukrainian government and Ministry of Defense saying, build these things. It's from the bottom up with entrepreneurs competing with each other, trying to provide better, more agile, more long distance, or being able to carry a greater payload. Entrepreneurs creating these kinds of drones and innovating at record speed. And it's pretty interesting to watch. Okay, shift gears to the next big story. The U.S. has halted USAID funding for independent Ukrainian and Russian media, putting critical outlets at risk of closure. Journalists have warned that this move weakens press freedom and aids the Kremlin propaganda amid Russia's war. Now, there's a court case or a court injunction to stop, just totally closing this down. But again, this is the process that Trump is chosen. I'll explain this more in just a little bit. Here's Elon Musk calling for the shutdown of Radio Free Europe and Voice of America. Now, the irony here that was started during the Cold War to have a voice into Russia, and that nobody listens to them anymore. But Russia would love to see Radio Free Europe shut down and other similar channels. And here's RT, Russian state media headlines on USAID from the past 24 hours. They love this idea of closing USAID. And again, I talked about this yesterday, and I talked about this in my 11 big stories 2 days ago and my 4 big stories yesterday. I talked about how the method is part of the message. Taking a sledgehammer to things is part of what Trump is trying to do to show his populist base. And I talked about some populism, and some of you pushed back and said, well, this isn't populism. No, this is populism. Maybe I'll do a video just about what populism is so that you can understand that. But yeah, the method is part of the message here. And you can go back to the 4 big stories or the 11 big stories to see more about that. Okay, next big story. U.S. will discuss ways to end Russia's war against Ukraine this week. Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, said top officials will meet in Europe to speak about plans, with Waltz stressing that Europe must take full responsibility for security guarantees. Yeah, this is like the attitude from Washington is, this is your problem, Europe. You got to do something with it. You've got to step up into it. Now, that's better than, hey, let's give Putin whatever he wants, or let's just, back out of it completely or whatever. But it's not everything that you're hoping for, because you want the U.S. to come in strong, right? And I don't think that's going to happen. But they're going to make a deal and still provide things. But Europe has to step up in a meaningful way. Now, during a conference in Berlin, a security conference, security and defense, organized by Handelsblatt in Berlin, Rheinmetall CEO said that Germany, already produce more ammunition than the U.S. And I think that they're talking about artillery ammunition. I'm not 100% sure. But then you saw this. We can make Germany ready for war by the year 2029. All that we need are purchase guarantees. Okay, so there's two issues here. By 2029, that's about 3 years too late. If Russia gets to conclude the war with Ukraine and then take a little step back, take a breather, and come back again strong, that's going to be a few years too late. That's part one. And then the other thing is, all we need are purchase guarantees. Yeah, so they can do it, but the will's not there to actually provide the businesses that need to build the things, like with yes, we're here, the purchase orders, go build it. And it takes a while for the businesses to be able to do it. So that's where we are. And that's true in the United States, but it's true on a much larger scale in Europe, because Europe has felt pretty secure under America's wing, and they're realizing maybe they need to do something differently. Okay. I saw this and I thought, wow, that's really amazing. This guy's awesome. My touch is eyes, how a blind combat medic saves his combat. This is from UATV in English. We're going to watch about a minute of it. So this is just really impressive.
Ole Hurol began his service in the ranks of the Armed Forces of Ukraine back in 2020 in the Luhansk region, but the full-scale Russian invasion caught him in the Chernihiv region, where he was trained as a combat medic. During his service, he held the defense in Donetsk and Luhansk directions, and also participated in the liberation of the Kharkiv region.
I have on my mom's line in my family all servicemen, very much from my great-grandfather, on my dad's line too, so I decided to restore this line, and I had such a desire to serve my country.
On November 30th, 2022, in the Kharkiv region, while carrying out a combat mission, Oleg stepped on a Russian mine and sustained numerous injuries, as a result of which he completely lost his sight.
Shrapnel hit my head, neck, arm, chest, near my heart and leg. I felt like there was something on my head. I wanted to reach out, but it wasn't allowed, and they started holding my hand. Later, I regained consciousness in a hospital in Kyiv, and it turned out that I have been in a coma for 28 days.
In 2 years, Oleg underwent dozens of surgeries and went through long rehabilitation. Then he decided that he wanted to continue helping his comrades and completed courses at the Lviv Medical Academy. Now he works as a massage therapist and rehabilitation specialist.
Wow, that's hardcore. He's blinded. He stepped on a mine, got blinded in the process, shrapnel all over his body. He has his legs, he has his arms, but he was blinded. And so he wanted to do more. And so he became a massage therapist, and now he is able to still contribute to the effort. That's just amazing. And this is just like a metaphor for the ingenuity that the Ukrainians have been bringing forward since the beginning of this war. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you today. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.